Hey everyone, this is Ari Witten, and welcome back to the Energy Blueprint podcast. I'm here with Dr. Joel Kahn, who is America's heart healthy doctor and one of the top cardiologists in the world. And I brought him on. I've actually had another holistic cardiologist on just a few weeks ago, and I wanted to bring Joel on, and Joel wanted to come on to give a nice kind of counterbalance and kind of discuss some of these issues from another angle, which I think is an important thing to do. Another little thing I'll add here is actually over the last year or so of getting to know Dr. Kahn, and he's also been a guest on the podcast previously, he's become a friend, and I've been reading his articles for years. And what strikes me about him is his commitment to the evidence, just really sticking to the evidence, wanting to debunk myths, and really just, I mean, there's so much nonsense out there. Dr. Kahn is really a force for, clearly communicating what the evidence really is. So welcome, Dr. Kahn. It's a pleasure to have you on again.
Thank you very much. I think we can all agree I'm really here. That evidence is accepted.
So I want to talk to you today about cardiovascular risk factors and how to modify them, how to prevent cardiovascular disease. I want to talk to you about nutrition myths. I know you did some gene testing recently that you're really excited about. We talked last time about fasting, which I highly recommend everyone listens to that podcast if you haven't already. But let's start with cardiovascular related stuff and nutrition myths. So first of all, I guess there's so much different discussion out there of what causes cardiovascular disease. And we have some people, mainly vegans, kind of really focused on animal fat, animal protein, saturated fat, dietary cholesterol. And then we also have, kind of the low carb keto world, paleo world that's basically saying, hey, all that stuff is nonsense. Saturated fat is not bad for you. In fact, it's good for you. You should be adding butter to your coffee and getting more saturated fat. You should be having more red meat and more animal foods and so on. So, I mean, how can we make sense of this? And it seems to me there's kind of cherry picking going on both sides. So what's your take on sort of the central paradigm or central causes of heart disease?
Sure. And I'll just say, although I chose to adopt a vegan diet 40 years ago, I've been doing this for a long time. I mean, I'm a medical doctor first and foremost, talking to you, talking to patients today. I've said this before, and I believe it firmly. Just show me data that I can reverse coronary artery disease with a steak, with egg, with a stick of butter. And my moral obligation will be to tell a patient, these are reasonable options, and here's the data, and here's, the serial angiograms or the serial carotid ultrasound, something. That data doesn't exist. There has been no change in our core understanding of how you can halt and reverse coronary artery disease, and it is a plant-based world. So I actually became vegan before I was a medical doctor. It happened to fit into my toolbox of being a cardiologist extremely well, but that was actually coincidence. And if it wasn't right, I wouldn't tell heart patients or general public about it as a preventive strategy, for heart patients as a reversal strategy. And I think I'm very concerned. You're one of the best people out there that looks for honesty and also parses out. The recommendation for the general public may not be the recommendation for the sick patient with heart disease, diabetes they're trying to reverse. Those are huge goals, and it takes huge efforts and moderation and everything, and this confusion in the nutritional world. So, I mean, we have advanced our understanding of what causes coronary artery disease, heart disease, #1 killer, men and women. President of the American Heart Association in November gives a lecture at the National Meeting of the American Heart Association in the morning on a Sunday, how to prevent heart disease. 4 hours later, has a cardiac arrest due to the presence of a 99% blocked artery he had no clue about. If the president of the American Heart Association, and he would have died had his family not jumped in and given him CPR, followed quickly by a defibrillator, 52 years old. I mean, fit man running a big department in Dallas, Texas. If he can go down, we can all go down, and we have to take the fact that talking about heart disease is not hypothetical. It's, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of deaths a year. We got to be very precise about it. So watching a PBS show late at night might have some allure about getting a flat belly before a wedding, but it should be distinguished from, is that really a proven heart therapy or not? And, sure, there's lots of gray areas, but we have lots of black and white hair. So going back to it, we've learned long ago the 5 basics. Do you have it early family history of heart disease, brother, sister, mom, dad, 45, 50, 55 years old, heart attack, stroke, early death. Do you smoke? Do you have a high cholesterol? And that number varies, but let's just leave it at that. High cholesterol. Do you have a high blood sugar or actually diagnosis of diabetes? And do you have high blood pressure? So those 5 exist, and there's no question. We've sort of added obesity on 15 years ago, though obesity overlaps with blood pressure, blood sugar, blood cholesterol because of the common fact that they go together in a bad way. But we can add now a dozen more things. We can add genetics like apolipoprotein E, ApoE, which also has big implications for brain cholesterol handling and Alzheimer's development. If you're ApoE4, or particularly if you're homozygous 4/4, you're in trouble, and you better get that lifestyle under play. Something called your homocysteine level, your lipoprotein A level, very simple and expensive blood test that the Biggest Loser trainer, Bob Harper, made popular in the last year because he announced on the Dr. Oz show that the reason he had a massive heart attack and almost died at age 51, even younger than the president of the American Heart Association, was a genetically inherited cholesterol disorder that he didn't know about. Now, Kahn is a premier article about 3 weeks ago. Something called TMAO. Probably most people haven't heard. TMAO was reported in 2011 from the Cleveland Clinic. 3 guys sitting around saying there has to be more than just cholesterol, diabetes, smoking. There has to be other chemicals that can be adverse to heart health. They identified 3. They narrowed in on this one called trimethylamine and oxide, TMAO, 4 letters. And they showed that the more extensive heart disease you have, the higher it is. They showed that it's created by eating red meat and egg yolks, interacting with our microbiome, and then producing in the liver this molecule that circulates in the blood. It directly causes plaque to develop in arteries. It directly inhibits your HDL cholesterol from cleaning out arteries. It damages kidneys. Over 1,000 research studies now. There's no blocker yet. The common sense thing would be to reduce egg yolk and red meat if you find out your blood level is elevated. I've drawn thousands of these blood tests on patients. The Cleveland Clinic draws about 5 a year, even though that's where this test was developed and patented. It's a fascinating test that really does guide nutritional counseling until we get something more specific, but it helps me. And there's even more than that, fibrinogen levels. So, and to answer your question you asked, from that's from sort of the analysis from the bench, from the lab. From a nutritional standpoint, you can go back to this very controversial figure, Dr. Ansel Keys, 2 PhDs, one from Oxford, one from San Diego. And you can talk about his research data, but when he published data in 1970, the 7-country study took 12 years to develop that first data set. He showed the foods that were correlated with the development of coronary heart disease in fairly simple areas around the world, areas in Japan, Croatia, Italy, United States, Crete, Finland, and such. And he showed that, things like saturated fat in butter, saturated fat in red meat, saturated fat in chicken and such were correlated strongly with heart disease. But he also showed one of the top foods was pastries. And he talked about how pastries are a perfect mixture of too much saturated fat, refined white flour, added sugar. He analyzed the relationship of dietary sugar to heart disease. It existed. It just wasn't as powerful as animal-based foods, like just eating a big piece of steak with a slab of butter on top. So we've known since 1970, you could argue we've known before, that it was, excess calories, processed food, the combination of foods rich in sugar, foods rich in saturated fat, and pastry being a perfect example. So there's really been no hidden agenda about sugar, but statistically, the relationship remains stronger. I don't remember if we talked about this first time. The country of Finland remains an unspoken but important analysis. In the late 60s, early 70s, the highest heart attack rate in the world was in Finland. And a small region called North Karelia could no longer afford guys your age, because you're considerably younger than me, guys your age going down with heart attacks and robbing the workforce of a lot of healthy people, or apparently healthy people. So they got together and they realized it was the diet. They smoked, like all of Europe, but the typical lunch was a piece of sausage, butter, cheese, and a piece of bread in your lunchbox, and you're a lumberjack. They went through this whole region of Finland, and they promoted at the food industry level, in the schools and the post offices, put some beans instead of beef, cut back on your cheese and butter. And actually within 5 years, they cut back on animal saturated fat about 80%. And even the sausage industry started putting meat substitutes in the sausage because they were cooperating with the government, got some subsidies. Heart attack rates dropped 85%
Wow.
in 5 years. And then they extended the study to the rest of Finland, and the same observation was found. And that study has continued on since the early 70s. It's a stunning example. And when you see these little anecdotes, and here you got a whole country that radically improved the health of their population by limiting and advising fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, whole grains, and limited access to animal fats. It's a powerful, powerful message about where reality lies, and not much has changed, really.
Yeah, there's so much in what you just said. I have 20 questions I want to ask you. Real quick, I want to digress on the point of Ansel Keys, because I know that there are a lot of people in the paleo world who have kind of tried to attack the 7-country study and debunk, and kind of demonize Ansel Keys as misrepresenting data. And I know that they're doing it based on some misinformed sort of, that they don't really understand the facts. And I know that you've written an article about this. Can you talk just a bit about Ansel Keys kind of clearing up misconceptions? Yeah.
And if anybody wants to read really an exhaustive paper, there's a group of nutritional experts around the world called truehealthinitiative.org. We don't sell anything. 400 plus people. They're very diverse. This isn't vegan. It isn't paleo. We agree you should eat mainly plants close to nature, as found or locally sourced, and mainly water, tea, and coffee as your liquid. Kind of 4 core nutritional principles, pretty hard to argue with. And then you can do whatever you want based on your ethnicity and your historical patterns. But we published a white paper, and if you go to truehealthinitiative.org, there's a white paper about Ansel Keys. It's actually 65 pages long, and it dispels myth by myth. Oh, his data in Crete was fraudulent because he studied them during Lent in Crete. Well, it turns so they didn't have their normal dietary pattern. And there's a lot of answers to that. He visited 3 times Crete, not just once. Only once was it during Lent. Turns out they fast almost half the year in Crete for various religious ceremonies. So if you really want to get a cross-section of their health, you have to visit them on some kind of fasting day. That's just a small little example. But there are people that, I get an alert from Google when Ansel Keys' name is mentioned.
Right.
It's just it's all the time that he didn't have 7 countries in his study. He had 22 countries, and he hid 15 of them to only report 7. That's like the most extreme bastardization. There's even an article on the web where Gary Taubes may be the first person in 2007 in his book to make that statement in a way that a lot of people read it. And you can follow 20 bloggers that literally cut, paste, cut, paste, cut, paste. What was originally like the show, the Game Operator, based on erroneous information. It's simply not true. There was a hypothetical paper 5-8 years earlier that involved, you can argue, 16 or 22 countries, but nobody cares. Dr. Mercola mixes them all up. I've written them. I've asked them. I mean, just for the integrity of your medical degree, get this right and stop beating a guy up. Was he a strong, powerful figure? Yeah. So are a lot of people that get stuff done in life. Mm-hmm. He had a personality and all, but it's time to move on, and let's realize a lot of what he identified is held up. If you want to say that the American Heart Association gets things right once in a while, I mean, they basically have endorsed almost all of his findings based on science, based on Harvard School of Public Health data.
Okay, so we'll leave it at that. But I just wanted to mention, because I know you brought up Ansel Keys, and some people listening might say, Joel's bringing up these Ansel Keys data, which we know from so-and-so paleo blogger Gary Taubes that's actually wrong. Well, I just wanted to point out to anyone thinking that actually there's a lot more to the story than you realize. So stepping back a bit to this place in, what was it, Finland, where they lowered saturated fat?
Country, North Korea, exactly.
Okay. So, I mean, what you just said is really powerful data, right? I mean, they're doing this kind of population level intervention, lowering animal food intake, lowering saturated fat, dramatic, huge reduction in cardiovascular disease. And yet we have data like that. And yet at the same time, somehow we're living in a world where tons of nutritional gurus are promoting more consumption of saturated fat and red meat and so on. So how does that even, and I'm not even saying my personal opinions on this, but how does that even exist? How can those two things both be out there?
Well, I'll tell a story I believe is accurate but people can challenge it. It's been reported from actually one of the co-investigators of the 7-country study, a very elderly European epidemiologist, that in 2008, the dairy industry met in Mexico City with the concern that the production of soy milk and just starting coconut milk and non-dairy alternatives, dairy consumption was down, sales were down. That's a problem. Get the whole world dairy industry together in Mexico City. We're going to come up with money. We're going to find sympathetic researchers, medical doctors, bloggers, and we're going to fund them to promote. Hey, you don't think that happens in life? That happens. Within a few months, Ronald Krauss, a prominent MD researcher in lipids in Oakland University, gives the keynote address at the United States Dairy Association on how wonderful it is to drink and eat dairy foods. And just a few months later, the first of 2 studies, this was a meta-analysis published in American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, 2010. First author is Patty Siri Torino. Last author is Dr. Ronald Krauss, who it's on his curriculum vitae, which is online, that he's gotten dairy funding for years and years and years. They do a meta-analysis. What we could not confirm that there was a relationship in the literature between extra consumption of animal saturated fat and the development of heart disease. Now, no one. They never said that put butter in your coffee. They just simply said they couldn't confirm what had previously been shown in other studies. The study, you could argue, the type of analysis, meta-analysis, has many flaws. And this particular study had so many flaws that the journal published in the same exact edition a criticism of that study. Why they accepted it, who knows? But a very prominent epidemiologist named Jeremiah Stalmer said, bad science, bad science, bad science, bad science. But, you know, once the word gets out, those that want to advocate. So Siri Torino, 2010, things started rolling, butter may be back, meat is good. And then there was a similar publication in 2014, different group called Dr. Chowdhury, not new research, this analysis of prior studies, which studies do you leave in, which studies do you exclude, what criteria to use, published a study. It really flamed the fire. Another study that was so bad that the Harvard School of Public Health, Walter Willett, said retracted. There's so many flaws that should never be in a medical journal. So 2 studies come out. That is the be-all and the end-all that has led to this giant confusion. You know, there isn't any new science. If you really want to look at the new science from the Harvard School of Public Health in the last 18 months, they've confirmed over and over in over 120,000 doctors and nurses filed for more than 25 years. Every time you take butter and lard and substitute a vegetable oil, and I'm not advocating eat lots of vegetable oil, but the science says when you do that, you drop your cardiovascular risk phenomenally by eliminating butter and putting in. Now, we don't have vegetable oil with trans fats anymore, so they may actually be a little better than when mom and dad had the Mazola tub when I was a kid, and it was full of trans fats, which we learned subsequently was a rather bad industry choice, but those are out now. So, I mean, that's as much as I see. And I want to share with you, because it's really pertinent to your question. I think your viewers will be able to see this. We talked about fasting last time I was on, and you're a big student of fasting, and so am I. This is a little diagram by Dr. Walter Longo in his book that came out January 2nd, Longevity Diet. But what it says is that the issue of nutrition, the issue of nutrition is so critical to making recommendations to patients, to countries, to children, that we got to base it on the strongest possible foundation possible. And he says there are 5 pillars on which to judge diets, and they are the basic science of what happens with single amino acids to mTOR, single amino acids to growth hormone and IGF-1, what happens in clinical epidemiology, which is like the 7-country studies, what happens in randomized studies, like maybe the Mediterranean study, I'm blanking on the name, with 4,000 people that was published a few years ago, Prediment, sorry, 7,000 people. You know, what happens in centenarians, that's really critical. If you have a diet you're promoting, let's look where people are active over age 100, which is the blue zones and a few more, and see if it's consistent. And then finally, he calls it big system or complex systems of farming and environment, the whole big picture. And, you know, one by one, he just slices and dices paleo and keto as being one pillar industries, you know, maybe 1 or 2 epidemiology studies. And I'll give you one last example, I'll be quiet. I truly don't have an axe to grind.
You don't have to be quiet. This is, I'm interviewing you.
Yeah. I truly, would like to know the truth for my health, my family's health, my patient's health, and when I write, I'd like to be right and give good advice. So just in the last few days in the LA Times, my friend Nina Tykel, though I've never met her and I don't think she'd probably take that title, I just offered her. And my
I
friend
saw
Gary
this
Todd,
article.
the DASH study, the #1 rated diet used in the world report, the Mediterranean diet based on the Predimed and others, terrible studies that have misled the public and led to poor health, even though they've only had thousands of patients and followed them for so long. And then in the same op-ed piece, but there's this study about the keto diet and diabetes promoted by a for-profit company, Virta Health, that has under 100 patients, has no control group, is not randomized, is short-term, and yet they praise that study as if thousands of people long-term university-based studies have no value, and they find this of value. I mean, it's that kind of distorted. Now, it may be true. It may be true that properly done, a randomized study of a keto diet low in protein, which is a very specific kind of keto diet, may have some short-term metabolic improvements in weight loss and all the rest. Still have to be very concerned, what does that translate to long-term health? But that kind of distortion just in 2018 in a major paper with no opportunity to write a comment at the bottom of the op-ed, so you can't even respond. That's about as biased and bad as it gets, but controversy sells papers, so there you go.
Yeah, I actually wrote a comment to all the members of the Energy Blueprint yesterday. I don't know if you saw it because I know you're in the group.
Yeah.
Basically saying exactly what you just said. I mean, they presented, it was like a few sentences on the Mediterranean diet, and they're like, based on this one study, the Mediterranean diet didn't show benefits. I'm like, and then they go on to the next thing to talk about how great low carb diets are, as if they've now debunked the Mediterranean diet based on one study that didn't show much effect, when in fact there's a huge body of evidence on the Mediterranean diet showing all kinds of benefits on cardiovascular disease, on diabetes, on obesity, on neurological disease, on cancer, on overall longevity. And they just bring up one study that they've cherry picked and then move on to the next thing. And I mean, this kind of stuff where people, like if you have a particular way of, a particular diet that you believe in, great, present the evidence in favor of it, but don't mislead people. Don't be dishonest and misrepresent the overall body of evidence.
Yeah, we've had a few setbacks. There were 3 Harvard researchers that appeared in the 60s to take some bucks to bias an editorial in the New England Journal of Medicine more anti-fat than anti-sugar. I've read the paper. Nobody read the paper. It's so scientific and dense. I mean, it didn't make headlines anywhere, but they shouldn't have done it. It's terrible. And it probably happens. Throughout the industry, humans are frail. So there's been a lot of pushback. The sugar data was hidden, and sugar's the only health issue we have in America, where it's not. It's a complex excess calories, 800 calories more a day of every variety of mainly processed crap. And we should get together, as I say, because your listeners will say, well, what do I do now? The LA Times, and Joel Kahn, Harry Whitten, heck, I'm just going to dip my bacon in cheese sauce and have fun because nobody knows. This True Health Initiative, which says, eat locally sourced, close to nature, mainly plants, water, tea, and coffee as kind of 4 principles to live by. 400 plus, professors and dietitians and MDs and PhDs that disagree on a lot, but agree on that's, where we know we can feed humans and do well. And, we got to worry about environmental stress. We got to worry about, pollution nowadays. It really is a serious issue. Although I think this factory farming and food technology in the next 10 years, you're not going to buy meat at the grocery store. You're going to buy meat in a machine, and you can dial in how much omega-3 and how much fiber, and out will come something that looks, kind of like that chew fruit we used to buy. And there's your meat, buddy. I truly think it's where the money's going. First, it'll be synthetic leather, then it'll be synthetic egg white, and then it's going to be synthetic meat very quickly. So some of this back and forth may start to diminish a bit. But I mean, again, you held up the book, I held up the book. Dr. Longo may be one of the world's leading experts on nutrition and aging in the world. 18 plant-based meals a week, 3 fish meals a week, very little egg, butter, dairy if you do any, and a lot of whole grains, a little bit of wine. It's kind of, again, another statement born of 30 years of nutritional research. We can, 5 pillars of evidence we can hang our hat on.
Yeah, and actually, by the time this podcast is published, I will have published the one with Dr. Longo. I just had him on last week, and so that I haven't published it as of this filming, but it's going to be released by the time people are listening.
Your audience will benefit studying his words. They're very powerful.
Most definitely. So, let's talk about cholesterol, and there's lots of layers to this story, but let's talk about like total cholesterol levels. And I mean, there's just been so much hype around cholesterol for decades now. And I would love to just tease out causation versus correlation, and how much of this is how much of heart disease and coronary artery disease is actually being caused by the cholesterol levels, and how much is like elevated LDL a symptom of underlying causes. Because we have lots of people kind of saying, it's not the cholesterol, it's not the LDL that's causing the problem. The body is sort of intelligently elevating LDL or cholesterol levels to deal with the real problem. So, therefore taking statins or other cholesterol lowering medications is misguided based on that paradigm. So what's your take on cholesterol and LDL as either cause or sort of just there as beneficial as an ally in your health?
Yeah, so there's so much science that goes back 100 years. About 1910, we started to find you could feed rabbits cholesterol-rich food, and they developed plaque. Nitschkow and some of these other Russian scientists. It just kept rolling. You look pathologically at plaque. You don't see sugar crystals. One of the prominent signs of an unstable plaque in a heart artery, brain artery, leg artery are cholesterol crystals. They're part of the pathology. Now, I mean, and that hasn't changed. Human nature hasn't changed. There are animals like dogs, you can feed all the butter and fat you want to. They'll never develop plaque. They have very different GI systems and breathing systems and dental systems, but we're very prone to it. So this relationship, very carefully done metabolic ward studies. That means, you got somebody locked. You can feed them what you want to feed them. You can draw the labs or do whatever you want to do. These were done in the 50s, 60s, 70s, when people were thin in the United States in general. And, adding excess dietary cholesterol, adding excess dietary saturated fat, animal products, cheese and such will raise blood cholesterol. And that is associated with plaque. That was the findings in the 7-country study and others. Bring it up to date. One observation is it's harder to prove eating eggs raises your cholesterol. One observation is the average American population weighs 40 pounds more. Their cholesterol is 50 points higher than it was in the 70s when those original studies were done. People use the analogy, if you took a smoking population of a pack a day and asked them all to smoke 25 cigarettes a day, it'd be hard to show much harm to those 5 extra cigarettes on top of the baseline 20. If you take an average American, put them in an egg feeding study nowadays, it may be the equivalent of they're a 20 cigarette a day smoker because they've got the excess pounds. Their average diet is not very plant strong and close to nature anymore. So we've muddied the waters. So in terms of your, I think the coolest piece of data just lately, a professor in New York, Dr. Valentine Fuster, a cardiologist, has been organizing a study in Madrid of 4,000 bank workers who say, I'm healthy, I'm 45 years old, there's nothing wrong with me. They're all getting an ultrasound of their carotid to look for silent plaque, a CT scan of their heart arteries to look for silent calcified plaque, and an ultrasound of their femoral artery to look for silent plaque in the femoral artery. They're getting blood work. They just published in November that about 50% of this group that says, I have excellent health, have silent atherosclerosis in their mid-40s. There's extremely strong correlation between LDL cholesterol and the amount of plaque in that study, with naturally the lowest LDL, low density lipoprotein cholesterol, having the least amount of plaque, the highest having the most. Another confirmation using rather novel free living humans that LDL at least correlates very strongly with plaque. You could argue, as you said, it's a reaction, but then why are there cholesterol crystals in plaque? Why is such a large percentage of almost any plaque you remove at time of surgery, heart surgery, like I've done for years, is plaque and waxy and cholesterol based. So, and then why is there generally, whether you use plant-based nutrition, wellness and lifestyle, or you use medications? There's this famous study. This is where it all disappears. Anybody who's never heard of the POSH study, P-O-S-C-H, forgive me, I don't remember, out of out of Minneapolis, but they convinced about 800 people with high cholesterol and heart disease to actually get a surgical bypass of their stomach, and the other half didn't. And by doing that, you can create a very low cholesterol by having this wasn't a weight loss strategy. It was surgical treatment of hyperlipidemia, high cholesterol. And you could show definitively in that group that by lowering their cholesterol surgically, drugs are out, bias is out, it's just as clean as it could be, you dramatically lower the risk of heart attack, stroke, and improve their longevity. Lowering cholesterol for the general population, at least those that are showing silent plaque or overt plaque, is a very powerful therapy. And it isn't to create billions of dollars for Merck and Pfizer. Most statins nowadays are generic and very cheap. I don't like statins. I don't take a statin, but I don't think it discounts this whole cholesterol theory. In terms of your listeners, they should know, there's been tremendous advances. You shouldn't just get a routine cholesterol panel anymore, cholesterol, HDL, LDL. Ask for an advanced panel. You should know what your LDL particle number is. These are available from Quest or LabCorp, from hospitals all over the United States. They're $38 or $40 and not expensive, because particularly if you carry extra weight and are pre-diabetic, the standard cholesterol panel pales with accuracy compared to these advanced ones. Be like Bob Harper, get your lipoprotein A checked. Make sure you know that very atherogenic molecule. That's $22. And don't walk around saying my cholesterol's awesome and have a stroke because nobody checked that your lipoprotein A level is 10 times the upper limits of normal. And no family doctor will check it unless you ask, generally.
So let me play devil's advocate for a moment. We have some studies that have come out that have seemingly, and these have been presented kind of in the paleo, low carb, keto worlds as kind of exonerating saturated fat, dietary cholesterol, animal protein intake. And so those studies kind of have existed where they said there isn't a strong link there. There's also been, I've heard people draw the analogy, like as far as cholesterol being in plaques, like that damage is being created by other factors, and then maybe cholesterol shows up to repair damage. So the cholesterol isn't causing the problem. So it would be the equivalent of like showing up to a crime scene a few hours after the crime and seeing police all around and then saying, oh, the police are here, the police must have done it. And then one other layer that I'll add here is I've also seen trials on some cholesterol lowering drugs, like for example, Zetia. And I remember a trial several years ago where they used Zetia, and Zetia did in fact lower cholesterol and LDL successfully, but it actually increased the progression of coronary artery disease. So how can we make sense of all of that?
A lot of really good questions, trying to focus down at it. So just step back. We clearly now firmly in the lexicon of cardiology is inflammation's a real deal. But actually that also was a theory that was promoted in the 1870s. And we've had this discussion, does measuring high sensitivity C-reactive protein, and now we have half a dozen tests of inflammation beyond high sensitivity C-reactive protein. But the majority of your listeners will never get their high sensitivity C-reactive protein done unless they specifically ask for it. It's just not in routine panels. We know that inflammation now is a real deal. In November 2017, a large international study called the CANTOS trial, C-A-N-T-O-S. If you're curious, just Google that. You can get all the slides in a PowerPoint. You can download them to your laptop and view them. The investigator from Harvard left them for public domain. And it was a trial of people with relatively normal cholesterol values. They had heart disease. They had elevated C-reactive protein. They got this crazy drug or a placebo, an injection every 3 months. The drug costs $200,000 a year. It's used for orphan medicine for a rare syndrome. But it blocks the production of something called interleukin-1 and ultimately lowers your C-reactive protein. Would lowering C-reactive protein with a pharmacologic drug alter outcome? Boom, it did. So if you lower C-reactive protein, I'd rather you do it by exercising, weight loss, avoiding food allergies or food intolerances you have, eating more plant-based foods that are anti-inflammatory. But nonetheless, the theory was confirmed November 2017 after 150 years. It's not going to happen with a $200,000 a year drug. That same study actually is being redone now with methotrexate, another powerful anti-inflammatory drug that is pennies a day and may actually prove to be part of the armamentarium. But please do it with lifestyle. Control your weight, control your diet, get your sleep, avoid psoriasis and all the rest. So inflammation matters, but so actually just Zetia is a drug that inhibits absorption of cholesterol from the GI tract, about 50% of the cholesterol. If you only eat plants like I do, I won't have any dietary cholesterol, but my liver continues to make cholesterol, and it's going to be in my bile and it gets in my intestines. If you eat eggs, you'll have lots of dietary cholesterol. Zetia blocks half of it. It actually ultimately was shown in an 18,000 patient trial called Improve It. If you take a statin alone or statin and Zetia, there was a survival advantage and outcome advantage. Zetia got the stamp of approval that it had outcome measures, not just lowering cholesterol. So it actually did ultimately. There was a little wiggly data when smaller studies was done, but the big mother study about 5 years ago, Improve It trial, was positive. That cholesterol is the bystander. I mean, go back to 5 pillars. I mean, we got Nobel Prizes in medicine given for identifying LDL receptors. What strikes me, I was a cardiology fellow in Dallas, Texas, 1986. In 1985, the Nobel Prize in Medicine was given to 2 researchers, Dr. Brown and Dr. Goldstein, for identifying on our liver cells, we have a receptor called the LDL receptor. And if you have the receptor, the LDL cholesterol comes out of your blood into the receptor, into your liver, gets metabolized, your blood cholesterol goes down. If you have half as many of those receptors, you have heterozygous familial hyperlipidemia, affects 1 in 250. So several people listening now probably have that. Cholesterol is 400, 500. You get premature coronary disease, strokes, atherosclerosis like crazy. And if you have almost none of those receptors, homozygous hyperlipidemia, you'll have a heart attack at age 10. And I was taking care of kids in 1986 and 1989 because Dallas was the place to go for that problem. And they were having bypass surgery at age 11. To argue that serum cholesterol, these weren't smokers, they weren't diabetics, they didn't have a long history of eating a Western diet, they were kids, that serum cholesterol doesn't impact. There's just too much data. I participated in a major science study at Wayne State University School of Medicine. There's certain SNPs, certain genetic variations that favor you having a low cholesterol your whole life. And we did, it's called genomic-wide analysis and modeling. If you're lucky enough to have a combination of those, and from childhood on, your cholesterol is lower than the average American, the side effect is your lifespan's extended and your chance of stroke and heart attack are reduced. So there's a lot of misinformation. We're probably more confused about HDL cholesterol. We thought it was simple. High density lipoprotein, high good, low bad. Anything you do to raise it, like niacin, like exercise, like alcohol, good. Then we got some drugs that raised it. They didn't work. They actually increased mortality. Those trials are stopped. And now we're totally confused. A recent study says if your HDL is very high, you may have double the long-term mortality of people with kind of normal HDL. Wow. That may be exactly what you're saying. There may be an inflammatory process in HDL as kind of a scavenger, reacts by becoming higher and higher, and it's in reaction to something that we have to look for the root cause, the functional medicine approach, inflammation, diet, rheumatoid or connective tissue disease. LDL, it's pretty clear that we can support healthy vitamin D, healthy testosterone, healthy brain function with cholesterol levels of 140, 150 total, because that's what they have in Okinawa, that's what they have in Sardinia, that's what they have in Icaros, Greece, where they live to friggin' 105, banging their wives and wives banging their husbands and climbing mountains. I mean, I'll go for that plan. I'll go for the centenarian plan, which is never a keto plan, which is never a paleo plan. It's a whole food, plant-based with 5 to 10% animals, sometimes high in oil like Crete and Icaros, Greece, sometimes low in total dietary fats like Okinawa traditionally before KFC came in and ruined Okinawa and such. But, study those centenarian zones and say, is my meat-only diet compatible with a long life? And, there's a lot of guys on Twitter that I interact with that have great ripped six-packs and pecs, but I really do wonder what's going on with their telomeres, what's going on with their TMAO level, for God's sake. Sean Baker, he's an orthopedic surgeon that Joe Rogan just interviewed about a month ago. I've eaten nothing but red meat for a year, Joe. I feel great. Joe Rogan, did you check any lab work? Sean Baker, MD. Why would I check lab work? Why would I even bother with that stuff? I mean, that is, as a medical doctor, so irresponsible as a message of a guy who's got a platform. It's not like he's doing it just as a pilot on his own health. He's basically advocating this.
I've seen the all meat diet, zero carb diet kind of emerge lately that completely avoids all plants because
Yeah.
Which is, I thought keto was kind of the far end of the spectrum, but to have an all meat, zero plant diet is I
it's a testimony to how amazing the human body is, that we can feed it a whole range of diets and survive. But when we're making public health recommendations for, optimal use of resources, optimal health, we have to come back to something a bit more normative. And I don't know how those guys poop, but I don't really want to find out.
Okay. So based on what you just said about dietary cholesterol, overall cholesterol levels, and kind of the role of that in heart disease, it would seem, based on that we should all be taking statins and Zetia to lower our cholesterol as much as possible, and that would reliably prevent heart disease. So what's your take on that? Do you recommend statin use widely, or do you hesitate? And if so, why do you hesitate?
Yeah, I don't, just because I, as many others, just don't like the idea of blocking an enzyme that for some reason is there for a purpose, and blocking it forever, every day, over and over and over and over. Plus, although we had a golden 10 to 15 years of statin data, in the last 10 years, we've learned about blood sugar elevation. Probably most importantly that, a lot of people don't feel good on statins, no doubt. So I use the least amount I can with the least frequency I can. And I use them on nobody who has freedom from atherosclerosis. So if you're in my clinic and your carotid artery medial thickness test is normal, or your calcium score is 0, I think it's rather criminal to think about putting you on a statin. Because we, just go back to the guidelines, which say try months and months and months of lifestyle. Or in my clinic, I'll use a lot of natural agents, red yeast, rice, bergamot, something from India called amla. These are things that actually have peer-reviewed data with basically no side effect. If people are willing to play with me a little bit and try all that. Meditation lowers cholesterol, obviously exercise. And there may not be a big urgency to lower cholesterol if you've proven, no guessing in my clinic, if it's proven that you have youthful arteries that are free of aging and atherosclerosis. On the other hand, there is, and I'm not advocating it, but there's something called the poly pill. This crazy idea 10 years ago, what if we take a pill in countries that don't have access to much medical care, put a little baby aspirin, a little bit of a blood pressure pill called a diuretic, a little bit of a statin like lovastatin, very inexpensive, little bit, I think there's a little vitamin D in there. Poly pill, cover the basis of a lot of cardiovascular disease. And they have shown that in kind of third world populations, you can reduce medical problems and manifestations of chronic disease with a pill. Nobody's advocating it for first world countries. We're still talking the need to exercise, eat healthy, get checked, and all the rest. But so that's, you got to talk the science. I don't want statins in the drinking water. Yet, high profile people like Dr. Steve Nissen, head of cardiology at Cleveland Clinic, would say he'd put it in the drinking water. And the UK kind of advocated that as an over-counter drug. So there is that movement, but we can't lose sight. It's lifestyle. Let's not go easy on people that are taking Provocol and eating Krispy Kreme donuts. That can't be the medical message.
Okay, so I know we have to go in just a few minutes here, but
Cool.
Last question: veganism. You're an advocate of veganism, so let me put it this way: is there strong evidence to warrant the complete exclusion of animal foods versus an omnivorous diet that's mostly plant foods by volume, at least 50%, maybe hopefully more than that, and is inclusive of some degree of animal foods?
I think all we got to do is say, Kyrie Irving, man, take it to the net and dunk it. And, we can see human performance on plant-based diet. But we need a little bit more than just, though there is a new documentary out. All your peeps should look up a movie called Game Changers, just played at Sundance, and then it will be released to the public very soon, about athletes, the world's strongest man, Patrick Boubayman, being plant-based for a decade out of Germany, and Rich Roll and Scott Jurek running the Appalachian Trial. There is something to be learned from super athletes who've converted, and their testimony is, I'm stronger, I'm faster, I heal quicker, and I repair. And then I don't know, we don't know the answer to your question. If it's 90% whole food, plant-based, 10% animal, 95 or 100. Is there a natural community that we have data on? The only one that there's data on is out of the Seventh-day Adventist studies in Loma Linda. if from 1958 on, our government paid and continues to pay a lot of money to research Seventh-day Adventists, if you answer I'm vegan, if you answer I'm a variety of vegetarian, pesco, ovo-lacto, or you answer I'm an omnivore, the lowest rates of heart disease, diabetes, obesity, hypertension, high cholesterol are in those, the 10% of Seventh-day Adventists to raise their hand and say 8 to 10%, I am a vegan. That's an association. That's not a randomized study. We'll never have a large population randomized study. But those Adventist studies do have 100,000 people tracked for years, 52-page questionnaires. This isn't a simple little process by which they're analyzing them. So I think that, you can do it. Don't be a dumb vegan. Don't eat crap food. Don't skip your supplements, would be the two strongest messages. Take vitamin D, B12, and algae-based omega-3. Eat whole food close to the earth, locally sourced if you can. Drink a lot of water, tea, and coffee. I mean, be a smart, healthy vegan. Still get your mammogram, get your colonoscopy. You got to do those things. We're not immune. I've had 40 years eating plant-based. I still get a heart CT scan every decade. I still get my colonoscopy because genetics are the last 15%, and plants can't overcome every environmental toxin and exposure to plastics that we all are prone to. But yes, the American Association of Nutrition and Dietetics, a very conservative and not very vegan-friendly group, publishes from pregnancy through grave, the whole spectrum of life. You can be vegetarian or vegan, but be a smart one, and don't flaunt the fact that you don't feel well because you never thought of supplementing with B12 or never thought of eating a rutabaga. You thought, again, that Pringles and Coke was some kind of environmentally friendly diet, which it is. Not very good for the environment you live within.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Kahn. It's really been a pleasure to have you on again. And I know you have to run to get to a patient right now, so I'm going to let you go. I would love to talk to you for another hour, but hopefully we can have you on again.
It's awesome, man. I look forward to seeing you pretty soon, maybe in April, I think. Okay?
Yeah. Likewise. Take care, man.
Bye-bye.
Hey guys, Ari here one more time. And just one quick thing before you go. I want to mention that Dr. Kahn has just come out with a brand new book called The Plant-Based Solution. So if you go to Amazon.com, type in Joel Kahn, it's Kahn, or Plant-Based Solution. That'll come up, and I highly recommend going and grabbing a copy of this. It just came out January 1st, 2018. And it's just a wonderful scientific argument for plant-based eating, and also probably makes the best case, in my opinion, for veganism. Even though I myself am not a vegan, I am a strong advocate of eating mostly plant foods, unrefined plant foods. And I think most people need to definitely move in that direction. So if you want to move in that direction, if you just want to incorporate more of plant-based eating in your life, or if you want to go all the way to veganism, or if you're just looking for maybe having some days or some meals that are entirely vegan and you just want recipes, or you want to see the science behind why eating this way is inarguably the best way to eat for health. I mean, and by that I don't mean veganism, but I do mean eating mostly unrefined plant foods as the majority of your diet. That is pretty much agreed upon by every nutrition expert in the world. I would say 99.999% of them agree that that is the best way to eat for health. So grab a copy of this book. Really wonderful if you want to move in this direction, or just get some great plant-based or vegan recipes. Wonderful book to have, and I highly recommend it.